Jamie, you want
Order.
You want the West Connects, Jamie?
You're joking.
Yes, he does.
If I want to burn $10 billion,
you want the cars back at White Bay?
Mr. Temporary
What is it?
Question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Balmain.
Speaker.
You want Wesley?
Thank you very much, Mr. Temporary Speaker. I rise this evening to speak on the Port Assets Authorised Transaction Bill 2012. We Greens will not be supporting this bill, and there's a range of reasons for that. Even if this bill was sensible, even if this bill didn't threaten the working conditions of the staff who work in these facilities, even if the bill did appropriately deal with the increasing of limits on throughput under the site, even if this bill was spent in an appropriate way in terms of the revenue, the way that this bill has been introduced, and I'm sure that members from the other side would be absolutely screaming if it was a Labor government that was introducing a bill like this in such short notice. And this is one of the great challenges that Labor has in this situation, because of course their position on this issue is undermined by the views that they have taken in the past on privatisation issues. And I acknowledge some of the comments, and I acknowledge some of the comments of the members of the opposition who have highlighted the fact that they have learnt that lesson, and it's difficult to be able to say that, and I respect them for raising that. That it is important that this government does not make the same mistakes. And I wanted to just address a few points because I know it is late, but it's important we address these few issues. First of all, of course, we've heard about the staff. We've heard about the staff and how well protected they are and how well they'll be looked after. Well, it's only for 2 years. There is a 2-year protection in this bill, and after that 2-year period, I'm sure that the pressures from this private company that owns this facility, and I suspect all of the facilities involved in this bill, will bring that pressure to bear against the workers who work in that port. And I know in particular that some of the older members who work in the port, several of whom I know who live in my electorate, are concerned about the pressure that will come to bear against them by the port that will seek to maximise profits and make that profit by attacking those people where they feel they can get the largest amount of return, which is the workforce. Another issue that I think is important to raise is this issue about no cargo throughputs. The member for Heffron raised this, and others, that if this government was fair, dinkum and responsible, it would comply with the with the EPA Act, and it would also follow the 2005 decision, which made it very clear, as a result of an environmental impact statement, that the throughput limits were introduced because the EIS identified that there were problems with the site. It was constrained in terms of what's the impact on the local community, what's the impact on roads, and a whole range of different measures, and that's able to be increased if another EIS is produced and the Minister supports it. But what the government is introducing on page 22, point 1, a planning control is of no effect to the extent that it would operate to impose a cargo throughput limit for Port Botany. So in other words, we don't like the rules, we don't want to have to go and do an EIS, we don't want to have to follow all the rules that any other facility would have to follow, we're just abolishing any throughput limit. And the reason why that's important, and goes to another reason, is that this asset is a critical strategic asset for the state, and when it comes to implementing in particular environmental initiatives, like trying to manage the fact that this government doesn't seem to care about the 40% target for rail freight, that seems to be abolished now. It's all about actually providing provision for freight on roads, and that is a critical issue. Again, going to another point, which is WestConnex. And I won't be dwelling on this issue because I know it's not directly related to the bill, but we know that WestConnex will not provide the long-term solution. There is not a public transport-orientated solution that this government is developing with Infrastructure New South Wales, unlike the positive vision that's put forward in many aspects of transport for New South Wales, that in fact what we have is a $10 billion plus tollway, which is there supposedly to solve a problem in the future, but in fact will not deliver that. The government needs to invest in rail. It needs to recognise that the cargo throughput limit is there for a reason, and there needs to be a commitment to rail, because the problem of B-doubles and large vehicles carrying freight throughout Sydney will continue to be a problem unless there's significant investment in rail. And by privatising this asset, there won't be the ability for the government to direct and ensure that the strategic objectives of this state can be implemented, in particular when it comes to issues, for example, around import-export facility, and what the priority of the facility will be in that regard, and also in regard to how we manage these assets going forward to make sure that we minimise the impact on our community. It's also interesting to note some of the comments that have been made about the position of this facility in terms of its near monopoly capacity. In fact, this facility does act very similarly to a monopoly provider, and that of course will have impacts when it comes to the charges that will be imposed on the community and imposed on those vessels and those stevedores and the wider, of course, in the end, consumers and citizens of New South Wales as a result of this privatisation. Because the fact is, as we've seen in Queensland, we see increased charges and increased fees, and we know that that flows on to consumers. And there's no evidence that this government has presented that says where the financial performance of this will benefit the people of New South Wales. We have assertions. We have one page for a multi-billion-dollar project, one page, which is given to the opposition and crossbenchers with about a day's notice, and the government says, we'll just front up and support it. You've got a page here. You've got a page. You can support a $2 billion, maybe $3 billion privatisation. We know that many millions of dollars has been spent, invested, you might say, in terms of the report which the government has received, which has outlined all the options and the issues around this. But it's not released for the public. It's not released for the members. And we're supposed to take the government on their word. And the final point that I'll say about this is it's very similar to the electricity privatisation, which we've talked so much about, because the Treasurer can determine what risks and liabilities stay with the state and what risks and liabilities go to the private sector. And one of the great problems that we had with electricity privatisation is so many of the risks and liabilities remain with the state, yet very few risks and liabilities with the private company. And that's one of the great problems, is that the risks and liabilities that are being afforded to the private sector and afforded to the state have not been identified in this bill and have not been identified to the MPs here, and nor have they been identified to the community. So it's unfortunate that the government has put itself in a situation where it's trying to impose its will on the House, it's trying to impose its will on the people here of New South Wales without adequate information. So in summary, Mr Temporary Speaker, I recognise that the government is focused. It's focused on one or two things, and one of the great things it's focused on with this bill is giving the shortest amount of time possible for any type of discussion. It's focused on making sure it gets its will without the adequate and full information which this House deserves. On that basis, Mr Speaker, I won't be able to support this bill. Thank you.